Okay. Does the word fractions make you cringe? What about multiplying fractions? It's even worse, right? My name is Alexis Johnson, and today I want to make these cringeworthy words a little bit less cringeworthy for you. I'm going to review the reciprocal multiplicative inverses in the rational numbers and multiplication of a fraction by a fraction. So the first one we're going to do is the multiplicative inverses in the rational numbers. You may be wondering what a reciprocal is. Well, a reciprocal is simply when you switch the numerator and the denominator in a fraction. So, for example, 3/4, the numerator 4 goes to the top, and then, or the denominator 4 goes to the top, and the numerator 3 goes to the bottom. So they flip, and that's the reciprocal of 3/4. Another great example is 6/1, which is actually just 6. Your reciprocal for that would be 1/6. So 6 goes to the bottom and 1 goes to the top. Another question you may be wondering is, what is a rational number? Well, a rational number is really any number that you can put in as a fraction or a ratio, as long as you don't have to have the denominator of 0. Let's move on. Okay, so now we're going to do a couple of practice problems with the multiplicative inverse of rational numbers. So you're going to have to ignore how rough my handwriting looks like with this thing. So we're going to do 3/4 times 4/3. And when you multiply fractions, you just multiply numerator times numerator and denominator times denominator, and then you'll end up simplifying if need be. So 3 times 4 is 12. And then, of course, 4 times 3 is 12. And that would simplify down to 1. Well, when you multiply anything by its reciprocal, which is what we're talking about, it will always give you 1. Always. So let's do one more. Just a second, get my eraser on here. All right, so let's do 5/2 times its reciprocal of 2/5. Well, 5 times 2 is 10. 2 times 5 is 10. And that simplifies to 1. All right, so that is the multiplicative inverses in the rational numbers. Let's move on to our next topic of multiplying fractions by other fractions. So this is super cringeworthy for me. I hate fractions, but it's become really easy for me to understand. So when you multiply fractions, you literally are just multiplying the numerators by the numerators, and you're multiplying the denominators by the denominators. So down here, we're doing 1/2 times 2/3. Well, 1 times 2, up here I have it set up a little bit easier. 1 times 2 is 2. 2 times 3 is 6, and that would simplify to 1/3. So another thing right here on this little image, it's another example. 2/5 times 3/4 is going to end up simplifying to be 3/10. So 2 times 3 is 6. 5 times 4 is 20, and 6/20 simplifies to 3/10. All right, guys, let's go over some real-life relations of this stuff. You may think you're not going to use it, but if you ever try to cook a recipe, you're going to have to be using fractions, whether you believe it or not. So this recipe right here serves 10 people. Well, what if you want to serve 20 people? Well, that's double what the recipe gives you for. So we're going to have to double everything. So let's multiply everything by 2. So with the bananas, you're going to have to do 3 times 2. Well, that's easy. It's 6. 1/3 times 2 will give you 2/3. 2/3 times 2 is 4/3. 1 times 2 is 2. 3/4 times 2 over 1 is 6/4, and that simplifies to 3/2. 1/2 times 2 over 1, and you see here we have a reciprocal, so we know it's going to equal 1. 3/2 times 2 over 1 equals 6/2, and that multiplies to 3/1, and that simplifies to 3. Now we are going to have Claudia review some division of fractions.
Okay, give me 1 second. Okay. Have you ever come across a problem or equation that is so foreign it seems almost impossible to figure out? At first introduction, the multiplication and division of fractions can feel just like that. Hi, my name is Claudia Kemp, and today I will be teaching you how to divide with fractions. Now first we have to be able to identify a fraction. A fraction, as seen in this picture, is defined as equal parts of a whole. So you can see here there are 4 parts of this whole, and each part is equal. Now, another thing about fractions is that they are composed of 2 parts. The numerator and the denominator. The numerator is the number on top, and the denominator is the number on the bottom. The numerator represents how many parts you have, and the denominator represents how many parts are in the whole. So you see over here, the denominator is 4 and the numerator is 1. So now I'm going to talk about division of fractions. But if fractions are part of a whole, how do you divide a number so small? This is where we are introduced to the word algorithm. Algorithm is defined as a process or set of rules to be followed in calculations or other problem-solving operations. In order to divide fractions, we use one of a few algorithms, and I'm going to teach you 2. The first one is called KCF, kind of like KFC. It's the keep, change, and flip algorithm. So you keep the first number, you keep the first fraction, you change the division sign, and then you turn over the second. You flip the second. So if you do the problem 1/2 divided by 1/6, you would keep the 1/2, you would change the division sign to multiplication, and then you would flip the 1/6 to become 6/1. Then you would multiply the numbers. So 1/2 times 6/1 equals 6/2, which equals 3. The next algorithm is a little hairy. It's a little more difficult than the first. The first step is to multiply the numerator of the first fraction by the denominator of the second fraction. So you see over here 3 times 10, and that number, the product of these numbers, would become the numerator of the final fraction. So see, it is 30. And then step 2 would be to multiply the denominator of the first fraction with the numerator of the second, which becomes 24. That number is then the denominator of the final fraction. So you can see and then the final step would be to simplify the fraction. So you see over here 3/4 divided by 6/10 equals something. So you would take 3 and 10 and you would get 30, and then 4 and 6 equals 24. So now you have 30/24. Divide both numbers by 6 as they did here, and you would get 5/4. And that is 2 different algorithms for solving division. It makes it much more simple and takes even the most hairy of equations doable. So thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our presentation and that you learned a little bit more about equations involving fractions.